So, assalamu alaikum everyone. Our guest is here.
Hello, assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Salam.
How are you, sir?
Really good. How are you?
Yeah, how are you, sir? I'm fine, alhamdulillah, sir. How are you?
Yes, really everything is good. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I can hear you. You're audible.
That's absolutely great. That's absolutely great. How is everybody doing? Would like to welcome whoever is joining.
Yeah, sir. Let me introduce myself first. Assalamu alaikum, everyone who is joining here. So, my name is Atufa Zainab, and I am a social media manager of Ralith Milith, and I'm hosting this session with you. So actually, I just want to introduce our Ralith Milith and our motto actually, first of all. So actually, Ralith Milith is our anti-drug society, which started with our thought, to we can say to remove this illness of drugs from our Kashmir, from our valley. So that was a thought of one person, and that's that started with other two, right? Now we are a team, and we are working as just to remove this and help people who are actually suffering and who are actually addicted with this drug disease. So Ralith Milith is an anti-drug society which was formed by in July 2020 with the main purpose to make our Kashmir free from this disease, drug free. And we are working to achieve this target of drug free society and helping people who are addicted to drug, especially youth. I hope we all know youth are going into drugs and they are forgetting that they have their career too, right? So inshallah in future we will definitely free our valley from this illness of drug addiction. And we are gathered here in this live session to create our drug awareness among the masses. So in this moment, our special guest, Mr. Yaqeen Sikander, is with us. So I welcome you in this session, sir. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Thank you. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, absolutely pleasure to join you and to hear about what you are doing at Ralith Milith. It's a beautiful name and with a beautiful vision that you have
Yeah.
Kashmir, in which the drug addiction has risen to epidemic levels lately in the
Exactly.
last few years. And it's one of the core problems, especially among the youth, which needs to be addressed. And
Yeah.
if young people like you and others are trying to volunteer and do things with regard to the drug addiction and the problems that we are facing in the Kashmir Valley, it's
Exactly.
absolutely a commendable job that you are trying to do. So thank you very much for inviting me. I'm absolutely happy to
Yeah.
be.
Yeah, so it's actually our honor to be with the personality with having this we can say talented mind with what we are actually doing. So I just want to introduce our guest first of all. So Mr. Yaqeen Sikander is a psychotherapist and a life coach who is currently living in Istanbul, Turkey, and hails from Kashmir. Actually, he is representing Kashmir in Turkey. So, as indirectly, he's making Kashmir proud in Turkey. So, thank you so much, sir, for being with us. And he did his bachelor's and master's from Malaysia, majoring in psychology. And one of the best thing he has done is he has written the thesis on resilience and happiness of Syrian refugee children who are actually living in Turkey. So that's a commendable job, sir, you're doing there. So I welcome you here in this session.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And just to say that I did my bachelor's in Malaysia. I did my master's in Turkey with my research fellowship in
Okay.
Germany. So that's what I did, and that's why, because there are so many refugee children here, especially Syrians in Istanbul and Turkey overall. That's
Yeah.
why, because of the background I come from Kashmir as well, I was very interested in studying their trauma and the post-traumatic growth in terms of resilience and happiness, and that's what I did during my master's thesis. So thank you very much for the introduction.
Thank you so much, sir. So let's start our session then. Sorry, right? So
Absolutely.
our first question was what actually drug abuse is? What
Mhm.
do you think regarding the drug abuse?
All
What
right.
is actually this?
Mhm. Well, when we talk about drug abuse or drug addiction, definitions are very important to know because it tells
Yeah.
us what the problem is. And once we know what the problem is, it's easier to acknowledge it, and then to find plans to make intervention about it. So when we talk about
Yeah.
drug abuse, it basically is illegal use of any drug. It could be an illegal drug which is not allowed in that country. It could also be the abuse of a prescribed drug which is given only to prescription, abusing that, or even excessive use of any drug more than the normal quantity. It could even be over-the-counter drugs, what we call as, if they are used for what they are not meant to be, not for the original
Hmm.
purpose, or in excessive amounts. That is
Yeah.
at the core of it what drug abuse really is. And when we talk about drug addiction, which is also really essential to talk about here,
Yeah, exactly.
and that is a neurobiological disease. A person who is addicted because of abusing drugs, a person who gets addicted to any drug, cannot live without a certain amount of the dosage of that drug. And these drugs, when they're abused, they lead to addiction and dependency. It can include, other drugs, for example, heroin, opium,
Yeah.
marijuana. Those are very common in Kashmir. In fact, morphine, Corex, brown sugar, things which are inhaled, solvent abuse, for example, be it varnish, be it turpentine, be it even kerosene, or medicines like diazepam, for example, or other
Yeah.
benzodiazepines, which are also abused. So those are the sort of drugs which can be abused and which lead to addiction.
Yeah, of course. So, like, sir, our second question for you is like, what can be the cause of so much spike in Kashmir?
Mhm.
As you have lived in Kashmir, so
I have.
what's the like main spike in this Kashmir? Like, why are they going in this?
Well, when we talk about why, especially the young people, according to the surveys done by a lot of different agencies, it found out that main users of drug, and it's this not only in Kashmir, I think globally as well. So far as I have done my own studies, it's the youth which are mostly involved. By
Yeah,
that we mean population which is between 17 to 35 years of age. Those are the
yeah,
core users. Rest is like marginal amount of people who are younger than that or who are older than that. But mostly it is uh, young people between 70 to 35 years of age. And in the last few years, the addiction to drugs in Kashmiri youth has increased by more than 1,000%. So we are talking about 10 times increase in the use of drugs here.
exactly. Yeah,
And when we talk about causes, what has led to it? A lot of it does come from the conflict, unfortunately, which is
yeah,
there in Kashmir. Because of the conflict, young people have become uncertain of the future.
of
There
course.
is
Yeah,
uncertainty about the future. Even though Kashmiri young people are generally educated, but despite of that education, young people ask me, for example, I get a lot of DMs on daily basis, and they're like, even though we have these degrees, but so much of the unemployment. So what's the point of all
yeah,
this? And it's like a cycle. So there is unemployment, there's conflict, and that unemployment leads to poverty. And then you have a circle of people that you meet up with. They're going through the same problems like you. So that leads to sort of hopelessness. When you start believing, you know what, nothing is possible anymore. And then you
yeah, of
start
course. That
losing
is.
faith in yourself. And that is a contributing factor, which
Yeah,
ultimately
exactly.
I young people towards going to drugs because it's a vicious circle in which they find themselves in Kashmir, and this idea that we just cannot get out of it.
Yeah,
That's where a person feels really vulnerable. And
exactly.
when you
That's
are
it.
vulnerable, you are likely to involve yourself in a few things which are conveniently available. In Kashmir, drugs are conveniently available. So that is where the young
Exactly.
people would move towards, unfortunately. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's basically what I think is the cause of the spike in Kashmir.
Yeah, we can also say the main reason for this is a lack of awareness regarding the drugs in the youth
Mhm.
because they don't know what they are doing. It's like a fun for
Yes.
them, right?
Or they're what they're actually signing up for. In the
Yeah.
beginning, they just don't know about what they're getting into. But once they get into it, it is what it is.
Yeah, exactly. So, another question for you, sir. It's like a social stigma, right? So why it is not treated as a normal disease? Why do they take it like smoking as a lightly? Because smoking is one of the drug too, right?
It
So
is.
they think like smoking is a fashion, so that's why I got that question in my mind.
Yeah. Well, that's actually a beautiful question. Why don't we look as a society at the drugs in the same way we look at smoking? There are
Yeah,
different reasons for that. It could be something cultural, but there are other reasons for that. And smoking is addictive because of nicotine. And nicotine is a drug which is highly addictive. So when it comes to
exactly.
drug abuse or drug addiction, smoking is also a part of it. Let's not forget that.
Yeah, exactly. Smoking is one of the actually in this generation, it's like a we can say a trend going on.
Absolutely. And why not the other sort of drugs? Why? Because drugs are criminalized for different reasons. Let's not go into the
Exactly.
politics. They're criminalized for different reasons. And that's why society gets the sense that whoever is a drug user is a bad person. And this
Exactly. They think.
common in Kashmir. We love shaming the victim. And it's not only about
Exactly.
drug addiction, it's also about a lot of other social problems that we have. And you see, because of the conflict here, and because of countering the conflict, and we talk about militancy and we talk about other problems, our focus was so much, we were overwhelmed so much with the conflict that we totally forgot about this issue of drug addiction. And while it was increasing, our focus was somewhere else. Because conflict
Yeah.
affects you in an economic manner, it affects you in a social manner, it affects your daily life and your lifestyle.
Exactly.
Our main aim on daily basis in Kashmir is survival. So we are always talking about conflict, about death, about killings. We don't often talk about mental health or the social repercussions of the drug abuse, for example. So that's why it stayed hidden until it reached the epidemic at an epidemic level. Why? Because our focus was somewhere else. Which is why now, because it's getting out of hand, we are talking about it. Prevention is better than cure. We should have talked about it years and
Exactly.
years back.
Yeah.
And now it's too much, and we don't have good rehab places, and we don't have a system for
Exactly.
rehabilitation. And addiction is a science on its own. You need special courses. Addiction therapists are different than normal therapists. They have special education in addiction. We don't have avenues like that.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
because of that as well, now we are like, it has just come the- until here to the head.
Exactly. Yeah.
How do we just get above it, right? Now, why don't we treat it normally? It's a cultural problem. It's not only
Exactly.
about
Yeah.
drug addiction. It's about any mental health problem. So that's the culture of the shaming in that sense, which we haven't realized, and that's why we're always drugs are really looked down upon in society, which is good. But at the same time, people who are involved into it, they should not be shamed. I tell you what,
Exactly.
whoever is smoking a cigarette, for example, forget about drugs, let's just talk about smoking. If you ask them, would you like your children or the loved ones to get addicted to smoking as well, they will never say yes. Everybody who
Of
smokes, they know
course.
smoking is a bad thing. Everybody, just like smoking, I mean, the drugs, ask them, like, would you like your close people, loved ones, to be involved in any sort of drug addiction? In Kashmir, heroin is very common, hash is
Exactly.
common,
Yeah.
marijuana is common. They will always be like,
Exactly.
no, we wouldn't want it for somebody else. What does it tell us? It tells us it's an addiction. It's
Yes.
not something somebody voluntarily puts themselves into, like many people think. No, it just catches up with you until it becomes an addiction. So what we need to
Of
do is
course.
we need to have more empathy, and we need to destigmatize mental health problems as well as addiction, because we have so many people suffering from it, and they have to unnecessarily suffer much more
Exactly.
because
Yeah.
of the stigma. Yes, they already suffer. Imagine the suffering which the addiction gives them. And on top of them, they have this social stigma as well, which they have to deal with on daily basis. So rather than
Exactly. Yeah.
providing support, we shame them. And because we shame them, they isolate themselves again and
Exactly.
go
That's
back to the
like
drug.
it depends on the mentality of a person. Like it's in society that is affecting them our mind also. And I just want to highlight our Ralith Milith motto, that is attack the problem, not the person. So
So we're,
we are working on that.
mhm.
Yeah. So
That
we are
is really,
working on that. Yeah, exactly. We are working on that motto. Just we have to remove this problem. We don't have to attack person who's affecting it. He's
mhm,
actually in need of help. So
correct.
we should try to help them, not to like deshame them, and not to just tell them, disgrace them. Most on in Kashmir, people disgrace those people who are actually addicted with this. We
Mhm,
don't actually try to understand what actually they are facing, what actually they had faced in their past. That was the reason that they affected this, right? That
mhm,
was the reason, like they came in this addiction, this disease. So people try to defame them. No, it's your loss. We can say it's parents fault or family background. No, we have to try to understand what actually they are facing problem. Maybe there might be any a serious problem in their family or in their life. So
correct.
I think we have to focus on what people are facing, what actually they feel, right?
Mhm, mhm. Absolutely correct. And obviously, most of the people that I have known, that definitely they have something in their family. They had some life events, and they just wanted a way out, or they just wanted to vent out their problems, and they found out that they might it might help them with easing the pain and making the suffering lesser maybe. So
Exactly.
that's also one of the things that pushes you there. If you don't have the proper awareness, a proper social circle to talk you out of these things, you will be vulnerable to drug addiction and many other issues.
Exactly. So, like, sir, another question for you is like most of the time we see students like they take drugs like there's a drug named nootrops to increase the brain function and neglect its side effects.
Mhm.
So, sir, like, what is a message for them? What message do you want to give to them? Mostly boys, actually, we can say.
Yes, mostly drug addicts globally. Men are more vulnerable to drugs, and there is a sociology attached to that because society puts a lot of burden on men, uh, and men, by the social rules, abiding by it, are not supposed to cry or express their emotion, have the
Exactly. Yeah.
financial burden, be the provider for the family, and always men have to act strong. So these are
Exactly.
some risk factors or contributing factors within a specific culture that can lead to an increased drug abuse or mental health problems like depression, anxiety, which goes unnoticed in men. Uh, Now, when you talked about this specific drug, it might be something specific to Kashmir, but I tell you about drugs in general, be it marijuana, be it heroin, be it hash, or be it other drugs which are abused. Generally, they make you feel good, put you in a state of euphoria, because we have certain hormones within us. One of them is like, for example, dopamine, and dopamine does make you happy. So what the drugs do is like they increase the quantity of dopamine in the brain, so you start feeling happy. But when it's unnatural for the brain to secrete that much amount of dopamine, you are deprived of it. And when you're deprived of it, your dopamine levels are like no more dopamine is left. So what's going to happen? Anxiety, confusion, depression,
Exactly.
paranoia, shakes in the body, glassy eyes or red eyes. And because a person who's addicted cannot resist the addiction of ingesting the drug or injecting the drug. And then once that happens, it starts affecting your social relations, and it starts affecting your family relations, professional relations, romantic relations, because it affects your mental capabilities of think to make proper
Exactly. Yeah.
decisions, to have proper memory to retain information, and it makes your judgment poorer. And that's why once you don't have enough money for buying drugs, there are reckless activities that follow globally. I'm not just talking about Kashmir.
Exactly.
Stealing,
Yeah.
robbery, including murder and fraud, usually are associated. These are risk factors associated with drug addiction because there has to be, once you're addicted, there has to be a constant supply, and the people are even willing to pay a lot of money for those drugs, even if they cannot afford it.
Yeah. Exactly.
And that's just the sociological aspect of it. So that advice to the young people will also be, there are a lot of risk factors involved when it comes to drugs. So if you're injecting drugs, HIV, a lot of the HIV which spreads is actually because of the needle, be it in Kashmir or anywhere else. Heart disease, coronary diseases are highly correlated with drug addiction, and be it depression, be it other mental health problems, they are also caused by drug addiction. So young people should know the cost of getting involved into something like drug addiction.
Exactly.
Trust me, the cost is absolutely huge. You cannot afford that.
Exactly.
So it's better to stay away.
Exactly. We can use the word for this oblivion, right? I
Absolutely,
thought that.
absolutely. Oblivion.
Yeah.
Oblivion is the word.
Yeah. So another question so for you is like hotspot is their hooligan of drug addicts and how to approach them. Like how do we approach to the drug addicts? How do we help them?
Mhm. What do you mean the hotspots here? You mean the places
Like
where people?
hotspot, exactly, where the drug addicts, their drug abuse is more.
Mm-hmm.
We can say they are in Kashmir. There's a growth of weed. That's a
Yes.
maximum number of like, yeah. So there, where the growth of weed is there, of course, that's a hot spot in Kashmir.
Mm-hmm.
So what is
Well,
your view regarding that?
look, things like these, it has many aspects attached to it. Any sociological construct. Right now, the construct we are talking about is drug addiction. Now, it has a perimeter around it, and in that perimeter, we have several factors that we need to consider. One of them is the mental health or the sociological aspect that we are discussing about. But there is also a legal factor there. There is also a law enforcement factor there. And
Exactly.
everybody has to work together. But on an
Of course.
individual community level, what can be done is counseling. But at the same time, and so far as the drugs the availability is common, it would
Exactly.
be difficult to make intervention. So that's why the government
Of
has to
course.
intervene. The law has to intervene.
Yes.
Law enforcement agencies like police have to intervene and make sure that drug supplies are not available. So first of all, we go to the root problem, and
Exactly.
that's the availability.
And
We need to curb that.
yeah.
That is a part of it is there. And how do you approach a person who's involved in drugs? It is the circle. Generally, drug addiction, it doesn't occur in vacuum. People can smoke just on their own, but generally it happens in a group.
Exactly. Yes.
It
Yeah.
is the circle that you have, and all of that is involved in the same activity, and
Exactly.
that reinforces it. And that's why, like they say, a man is known by the company he keeps. So if you want to leave that addiction, what you're going to tell them is go away from that company, be somewhere else,
Exactly. Yeah.
and make sure we tell those people, we don't shame them. We tell them it's all right, you know. But at the same time, think of, do you know, are you aware of the consequences that you would have to pay for the drug addiction? Most of the times they really don't. So
Exactly. Yeah.
once we make people aware that a clean, drug-free life is more fulfilling than something
Of
which is
course.
temporarily enjoyable, but you pay it with your health in the long term, you pay with your wealth in the long term, you pay with the peace of your mind and with broken relationships. So
Exactly. Yeah.
it's better to not to do it. So if you approach people in that sense, I think that would be helpful in the long term. That's just something that I can.
Yeah. Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to add something, sir, in this. Sorry for the interruption. So it is like they are using this frame that is sharing is caring. They are using that phrase in this mostly. So they think like this is a sharing is caring is a actually real sharing is caring in this. right?
Oh, yeah. I get what you mean to say that. We have the concept of baradari, and then people are like
Exactly. Yeah.
getting together for hooking up or whatever they find proper. But at the same time, the consequences that you pay and your family pays a
Yeah.
lot of the deaths that I know about from drug overuse. And at that time, you die alone. That's
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a family who suffers.
absolutely. And that's why when we think about the family, then you wouldn't remember so much about your friend circle and the pind and getting together with all that baradari. It's not gonna stay for
Exactly.
long.
Yeah.
So that time is
Yes.
just your own self, because when you're in the hospital or when you're in the rehab, these are
There's no one.
difficult places to be. Correct, because you'll be on your
Exactly. Yeah.
own. That is something to be kept in mind as well.
Yeah, exactly. Sir, I have another question for you. That is, what is the role of society and friends, parents, relatives, etc. in this? Like, how can they affect?
Mhm. Society does have a role, a huge role as a society. Now, let me tell you something about when we talk about crime. I'm very interested in criminal psychology and as such. Auguste Comte was interested in studying society, and he came across this approach called as structural functional approach, which is basically like society is like an organism, and we work together as a whole,
Exactly.
to
Yeah.
move forward. And then we have in this approach we have the concept of what we call as Durkheim deviance. That crime is a deviance from the norms of the society. Normal society chana drug addict asa kya isliye jo small
Exactly.
population,
Narrow-mindedness.
yes, social deviance matlab yim che
Exactly. Yeah.
deviate gam wapas anan that curve mas wapas. But at the same time,
Exactly.
something interesting about study of crime is it's basically a bigger reflection of the society, and that was Durkheim's concept. People who are drug addicts, one of the risk factors here is abuse as a child, or
Yes.
not getting enough of the support from the family, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So the crimes that we do behind our doors as Kashmiris, as Muslims, as Hekowinit
Yeah.
Kashir Kazash as Pirwar, and behind that concept,
Exactly.
I mean, what
Yeah.
worse can happen? I mean, I just hate this
Of
when people
course.
say this and Pirwar Teli Bache is communist. Like, I mean,
Exactly.
what is worse than this drug addiction, this conflict, people dying every day? And what is the worst thing that can happen? Yeah, so that yim cheez सोचने की ज़रूरत, and that's why rather than shaming those drug addicts, we should introspect,
Exactly.
tafakkur,
Exactly. Yeah.
ask ourselves what is our role. For example, family. If a person is a drug addict or a drug user, and you go to the family, you go home, your family should be able to see something is different. There are signs. But if your family is so uninvolved, like, there is no idea, like they feel like everything is normal, or they just don't care.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
that's something else, because not knowing the law is not a misal ke taur pe mezan chan pada ki Kashmir mas nasa chan. For example, in Amsterdam it's allowed to smoke the weed. Wazan one ma mechan pada ki Kashmir mein bhi smoking weed, and I go on the street and police arrest me. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse. Similarly, the parents, the families, the forget about relatives, we should at least know the basics, so
Exactly. Yeah.
basics of drug addiction, basics of behavioral change, a child coming late, or money disappearing from home, or at the same time being withdrawn from the normal conversations. Certain signs, withdrawing behavior, for example, giving your, these are some small signs that we
Of
can talk
course.
about.
Yeah.
So those are, I think that is the role of, in that sense, of society or family, to be there for our beloved ones. And it includes friends as well, to look for them, not to shame them, but to tell them, what,
Exactly. Yeah.
talk about it. And in Kashmir, we have this concepts like Kashmir Machulukaniwa Azurwun. And that's why
Exactly.
we are always
That
behind.
is a main problem. It's a thinking of Kashmir, each and every Kashmiri. I can say I'm really sorry for the shame. I'm sorry for using this word, but yeah, that is a problem.
It really is. And living in that society, being a Kashmiri, now what you cash gasa. So the problem is that's what a crab mentality is. Crabs ko agar
Exactly.
I have lived in Malaysia for a long time. Yeah, back in Jain, it must seafood some area. You see, crabs ko jab ek jagah rakha jata hai na, when they're just put in the same place,
Yes.
none of them, because
Exactly.
one holds the other, they hold the other, they hold the other. So is
Exactly.
wajah se
Yeah.
we don't love each other's progress. So I'm
Of
saying,
course. Yeah.
for example, relatives. तो अच्छा पता नहीं शनो लड़के उसने क्या पागल खानो दवा या उसने क्या रिहैब पर दवा.
Exactly. Yes.
You know, as if it has been a discovery, and then people start talking about it, which matlab, somehow I have seen this sarcastic or how do you say sadistic happiness in people, this
Exactly.
suffering, and you're happy about it. She pata jab se ladki shno sosna par drug khawa pata so sweet par dimo pat karo please Allah japa, you should be sad about it. And I just don't know, it's a social thing. Rather than that, if you are really concerned about someone, because we try
Exactly.
to basically ऐसा गबत करा, मगर so गबत करा just we want to prove that we actually have the concern for other person. मतलब हमें
Exactly. Yeah.
अगर आपको concern होता, you don't talk about it. You will just talk to that person that what are you suffering from. Try to read about it.
Yes.
Try to help, because ultimately you have to tell the person what is gonna help them. And questions like these ये actually society yes जो हमारे यहाँ के जो drug addicts होते हैं तिम चिकसा ज़्यादा isolate, and once they are
Yes.
even more and more isolated from the norm and loneliness, by the way. And this was one of the experiments you can read about it, which the municipality of in Portugal, the municipality of, was it Porto, Lisbon, if I'm not mistaken, I have to check it out, but in Portugal I'm sure about that. In Lisbon they had this huge problem with drug addiction. And how did they overcome it? They basically, everybody was shaming the drug addicts, inki problem hai because they're addicted. They just engaged them in good social activities. They just engaged them in some
Exactly.
jobs and stuff. And drastically, the amount of drug addiction got reduced, because
Yes.
it's the lack of connection. Definitely.
Exactly.
And about addiction, I mean, the way we look at the addiction as a whole, there is a problem globally. The way we look at addiction basically
Yes.
is lack of connection. And so, and there were so many other, for example, experiments which were done. In one of the experiments, they had rats. In psychologically, you work a lot with hamsters, rats, or guinea pigs, for that sake. And in one of the experiments, what they did is they put rats, and they gave them a drug which increases their dopamine levels. And they were isolated, like they had the normal cage and stuff like that. And the
Yes.
rats, they started taking these drugs and getting high. They loved it.
Exactly. Yeah.
In the other group, what they did basically was they put the same drug there, but they put those wheels for hamsters, they put all the other kinds of pleasurable activities, and guess what? Even though the rats had the option of going to the drugs, none of them went. The drug addiction of the rats, it reduced to a huge level, which again proves if the social support is there, if there are activities like productive activities in which they can be engaged into, it's going to drastically lead. So I think when it comes to drug addiction, rather than talking the person who's taking the drugs, I think we have to talk about the society as a whole and how judgmental we are. And because of that judgment, society to the खोचा अगर इस मतलब बुझो समेश वाला ये तो इस society से ना खोचा अगर अल्लाह ताला से सुनो to the खोचा ऐसा सो कश असन सरी वली अल्लाह बने में मतलब जितना हमारे यहाँ डर होता है हम क्या मन में रिश्तेदार क्या मन में महू क्या मन में पूरी जिंदगी इसके अंदर चली जाती है. Like all our life is all about worrying about these intrinsic details, intricate details, which are trivial detail जिनकी जरूरत ही नहीं. So that's why when we talk about role of society, friends, parents, relatives, yes, there is a role, but nobody is ready to take the responsibility. And this living in fool's paradise, I don't know why, when it comes to especially the elder generations, we think that we have no fault. And whenever even you tell parents that your child is like involved into pornography or addiction, they're like, nahi, main bachelor se nahi kari thi, tarbiya thi. आपको किसने कहा भाई? So far as you are a human being, you can do anything. And as a therapist, I know every person is capable of doing any single thing. So that's why people, when they are like denial and denial, na someone by checking karti ye should possible hai to badal ka reason hai nahi, you will have to see maybe this is the issue. Plus this idea that Kashmiri people are somehow very nice, so we cannot have any crimes. That is again not true. So far as we are human, we will have these things. So rather than denial, we should move towards action. So yeah, that would be, I can endlessly speak about the society, but I'm a part of it as well. But yeah, this was
of course,
of course.
So I have some questions regarding the solution, like how can we help him? So how can a person approach them? As first question, I love to ask you.
Approach ki humne baat kari. We already talked about the approach, that how you should approach somebody without shaming them, and talking to them, making a human connection. Addiction is lack of connection. पहली चीज, हम उन लोगों के साथ बात ही नहीं करना चाहते. You should show them, you should charsi, you should baki, you see labeling है ना ऐसे, and that has just destroyed us. Because you know what, you try to keep yourself separate from that, and you just, it's a perspective. We tell our children like what? Kashna sa musafir asin ya homeless iska insan ya kahan zana show diya kahan wucho char chamai baat hai. But you lekyu not bani with hai but matlab varna otherwise you will become like these people. This is what we are taught since we are young. Aur us dar ki wajah se, like, we're always keeping ourselves up. The right perspective would be read and write so that you can make the life better for such people. We use these examples to scare the society. This is not how you have to be. So kya cheez kara? Kya is it? We want to run away from the responsibility. जबकि reality ये है, उन लोगों की जो हालत है उसमें हम भी जिम्मेदार हैं किसी न किसी तरीके से. We are also responsible for that as a society.
Yes.
So that's what we discussed before this as well. तो इस वजह से approach करने की बात. And at the same time, the young people, when we talk about awareness की जब हम बात करें, Ashana, we have these wrong examples. The Ashes which to watch Netflix, watch Amazon Prime, then you watch things like Breaking Bad, and you watch Pablo Escobar, and then start celebrating drugs. Ashubasa matlab, because there is money involved, because there is mafia involved, and there is so cool, and mafia can have so much money, so many women, so much of whatever they can ask for, and then you have documentaries, and then you have series about these people, and somehow the culture that, what, it's cool to be out of the box. Out of the box.
Yeah.
अब तो smoking वो तो अब इतनी common हो गई, सोचिए सही चावा हमको उसमें असम बात होता है.
Exactly. Yes.
And that's where the problem lies. And that's why we don't need to celebrate these examples all the time. We have a lot of other examples that we can celebrate as well, because film chekasa start, it all begins and ends well, but they don't tell you the problems these people live with or lived with. So that's something that we need to understand. So approach with love, approach with friendliness, I would say that.
That's really nice. Sir, one more thing is that there's a confusion among youth. We can say confusion among society, like difference between psychiatrist and a counselor. So they combine those both of, like they think both of them are same. Both of them are doing the same job, same role.
ये confusion to sir के बारे से question his problem. Isha's it's a very South Asian problem. It's not only because for example, sometimes I log into, let's say, for example, on the social media or LinkedIn, for example, I see in India mental health practitioners talking about themselves, and it's completely wrong. Then I'm like, if you have studied this science, if you are a psychologist and you don't know who you are yourself, you can't expect people to know. So Sushuk, I just said it to provide a background. Now, psychiatrist is a doctor, medical doctor. Yus MBBS kari, MBBS moklo timo kare. India की context में बात कर रहा हूँ. बात करें तो further doctorate psychiatry mas, yat MD shwana. So they become psychiatrists. So they specialize in diagnosing, assessing, and providing medicine for mental health problems. Now there is a difference in Western, for example, in North America, psychiatrists can also do more years of residency, or they can also take a couple of years extra to provide therapy, become
Yes.
therapists. By default, that's not the case. By default, a psychiatrist is not a therapist. You cannot have sessions with a psychiatrist. Psychiatrist just assesses you, tells you you have this diagnosis, and writes you medicine. That's it. Unless they are educated and they are licensed to provide therapy. Now, the problem is there is no system of licensure in India. Anybody is anything. Only there is RCI, which is the Rehabilitation Council of India, which somehow regulates who are clinical psychologists. But it's, again, very problematic. And I have discussed it over and over again and again. Now, then you have people like me who are therapists. A psychotherapist, but again, a person becomes a therapist after you take supervision of 2,000 hours or more, besides having a master's degree in clinical or counseling psychology. So I am a practicing psychotherapist, which means I see patients and clients in my private practice. And therapists do several forms of therapy, which is like long sessions, like 1 hour sessions, 50 minutes to 1 hour. For example, me, I do mood disorders, which is depression, anxiety. I also do trauma in relationship. Okay, so it depends on, it's very complicated again. It depends on where you did your specialization and what you specialize in. For example, if you have, because Kashmir has so less therapists or psychologists, otherwise it's a specialty. Even if you're a therapist, it doesn't mean you can treat anybody. You can have sessions with every single person, you know. So there is and a counselor is basically, you can have a bachelor's degree and become a counselor, which means you don't go into people's lives so deeply. You just try to counsel them, give them guidance, tell them, for example, like for example, what we talked about today. This is counseling. You know, you just have issues in the surface, but you know, going deeper issues, looking for traumas, looking for childhood problems, and then coming out with therapy techniques based on what you choose. For example, I do existential therapy, I do transcendental, I do cognitive behavioral therapy. So both based on, and also like Islamically oriented psychotherapy. So that is my background. Some people use other therapy modalities based on who their supervisors were. All right. So it really depends. Now, because the branch is not so developed in Kashmir, everybody is everything. So, but that's the basic difference. Psychiatrist gives medicine. Therapist does therapy sessions, while as a counselor is more about awareness.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir, for that. And the last and the question is, like, what is the role of religious scholars and the stakeholders?
Well, religion and stakeholders has a huge way to go into this. Now, the idea is, again, as a system, our religious scholars, for example, I know religious scholars, Muslim scholars in other parts of the world, who are trained in certain subjects in psychology. For example, and this has been there in the pastoral practice from a very long time. Pastoral practice is those people who want to become pastors in the church, they do have to, when they do their master's degree and stuff, they do have to take subjects in counseling, in guidance, in addiction, in a lot of other things. So curriculum chunaskia. When we talk about madrasas or when we talk about other things. So a person who comes from a religious seminary, technically in that part of the world wouldn't know how to approach a person. So again, which is why people who are addicted, they don't find refuge in religion which they should. And overall, we are a religion-based society. So religious scholars have a huge role in counseling the young people to stay away from drugs, right? But at the same time, you have to make yourself aware as well as a religious person, that to understand it from the other side of the perspective. Not that, you know what, Allah says it's haram, so it's haram. That doesn't solve the problem. You know, as a therapist, we come with the mindset of intervention. That means we will do what's going to help. So whatever is going to help will be there for you. So shaming the people and telling them, you know what, you're going to hellfire, I don't think that helps. And that's just my opinion.
Exactly. Yeah, so we have a question from one of the audience, that is Amir Bhatt. So he's saying, like, I'm interested in both therapy and psychiatry. So what should I do?
Get a degree in medicine and then move abroad, which provides those options. And the idea is to get licensed under a certain board. So if somebody is interested in psychiatry, you first need to have a degree in medicine. And it also depends on where did you study. So for example, if you're in the US, to bachelor's degree karen, bachelor's path hai medicine pare. Time medicine path hai psychiatry mein specialization kar. So it takes around 10 years to do that, right? And then you have to take like a couple of years extra to study about therapy and stuff like that. But it's possible. Like
Exactly.
you have to become a doctor first. And after that, even if you're in Kashmir or anywhere, after your MBBS, you can start studying psychiatry and specialization like an MD in psychiatry, plus take your courses and supervision in therapy.
Yes. So one question is from my side to you, that don't you think the awareness of drugs should be like, common in madrasas, and you can say maktab, we are going in for learn Quran. So don't you think that that should be an important thing in madrasa too, like in the others, rehabs in madrasa?
There has been a huge talk about reformation of the madrasas and the idea as such. Now the question here is, the time is moving very fast and we can know that. This awareness should not only be about addiction, mental health in general, because
Exactly.
या सच ईमानच कमी या चोदे 5 वक्त परन नमाज या छ कुरानस करन तिलावत तीन चीज सब मौकल, which is not true, and we know that it's not true. उससे प्रॉब्लम क्या होती है कि young people, they go away from religion, they try to find solution in other places because their problems were not addressed. तो उस वजह से हमको क्या, one of the things that I teach as well in workplaces to the students is something called as mental health first aid or psychological first aid, which is not for psychologists only, it's for every single person to know what are the symptoms of mental health problems or addiction and how you can connect these people who you think are at risk or are already addicted or are vulnerable, for example. How do you refer them to proper channels which can help them? So वो चीज जो है वो बहुत ज़्यादा ज़रूरी है, the awareness, or there has to be a module that talks about mental health, or even talk about mental health from an Islamic perspective, which is beautiful. Islam has always emphasized mental health to a huge extent, and that would be a different discussion altogether. And that is something that we need to make mainstream and to break these stereotypes.
Yeah, I hope Amir has got the answer for this. So, another question for you is from writer Idris. He was trying to convey with the message is like, is company important a person should have?
We talked about this before as well. Interestingly, it has been found that peer pressure, let's say, for example, the people who are very close to you, and if they're involved in anything, you are more likely to get involved in these things. And especially nowadays, because you want to act cool, you want to act out of the box. So to be the cool, you just want to be the part of the group. And in order to belong to the group, you want to be like, you know what, I'm just going to try this drug once, I'm going to be out of it. And in no time, you find yourself addicted. And then what's next? So your company has a huge impact on you.
Exactly.
And that's why you have to recognize these red flags. And if you see your school, in your college, wherever you are, you see people involved in any such activities, you should actually know that it's not right, and in fact try to tell them as well that this is just do things. If we go that path, there is no end. It's like a bottomless pit. I mean, it's a problem even in cities where the facilities are extremely developed. And imagine Kashmir. For example, I always say this, to be honest, because as a Kashmiri, because based on the facilities, I'm not blaming anybody. You should pray to Lord that save me from all these things. Chahe patso COVID asin, chahe baki cheezen, chahe as facilities available. मतलब अगर कश्मीर में छुना मतलब कुछ कुंतात बनाए मतलब अगर हसा कश्मीर में छुना totally गसा heal from a very big disease. आपको सोचो किस्मत असल देखो तो दोई कर because we don't have those infrastructures and we don't have those things which can lead to people. So I always say that pray to God to prevent you from all of these things, because once you're involved in these things, it's very difficult. तो issue हमारे पास कोई भी ढंग का rehabilitation center नहीं है, like proper rehabilitation. That's one of that must, for example, there are things which are required for addiction therapist. So there are people who are specialized into these things. We have people who are generally specialized and they became specialized in these things based on their experience. But that's not how it's supposed to be. It's the other way around. You take your supervision in addiction especially and then you start practicing. हमारे यहाँ क्या होता है? We start practicing first. Because we are so much with the addicts, हमको उनसे पता चल जाता है, and then we start doing it. It's a wrong approach. That we avoided.
Yeah.
That's
yes.
what
So we have a last question for you. We won't take much time for yours. So as a Ralith Milith, like where should we start giving them awareness?
Well, where should you start? You have already started, and that's very beautiful. COVID, I would actually ask to talk to different schools, talk to different communities, and they would be very welcoming. I think Kashmir still has that culture. Like I remember when I was doing programs in Kashmir, this is 2008 till 14, before I left. I was doing it all, not 2014, 2010 actually, when I left, and summers. We used to do programs in schools and colleges and stuff. People were extremely, that would be one of the ways. Talk to students, get to know people. That's a good beginning. And then there is no looking back. And that's where you start. You start from individual level, start from youngsters, and start training people to know, for example, the signs of drug addiction, what to do. Make like a community who to refer to. We have a psychiatrist that we can refer who knows addiction very well. We have a therapist who knows addiction very well. And that sort of community you need, because it is a communal effort at the end of the day. And if somebody is addicted, what sort of support groups that we have? Because there is something like group counseling or support groups where people who are addicted or ex-addicts, they come together and they talk about it. So providing that social environment, if you can organize a group like that, even if it's a virtual group, that would be something which would be really beautiful. That would be a commendable effort to see anything like that happening in Kashmir.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. It was really an we can say informative and impressive session with you. And I as an individual enjoyed, and we are getting the messages from others, like they are really happy to be like as a part of this session. So thank you everyone, and especially Mr. Yaqeen Sikander, like he spared some time for us. So thank you so much, sir, for this.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much, sir. It was really nice to be as a part of this session. Absolutely. So thank you so much, sir.
Please take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.